remember.
Talk about any production names. Actually, I was out with James Rogan yesterday. He was on BBC this morning. He did the Freddie Mercury documentary. It's coming out tonight. Yeah. So that's
That'll be an interesting doc.
Amazing.
yeah, yes.
Hopefully it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
If they make it boring, it'll be a interesting.
Yeah.
Okay,
Quite challenging.
everybody, welcome this evening to the Jam Academy, which is a very special place everybody should know about and support. I am Robert Laycock. I'm hosting the Q&A tonight. We are also live streaming on YouTube, so everybody needs to be mindful that what you say is being broadcast to the world. We are also asking people on YouTube to submit any questions, and I think the questions will be run through here at the end of the kind of panel bit, and we can, you know, if you guys live here have any burning questions, if you can save them up for the end and ask us anything really you want to ask. So can I just introduce this really exciting panel, and for anybody listening, there's a second panel this evening at 8 o'clock, which is about development and storytelling. One of the panelists tonight is Dom is going to stay on for that panel very generously because we had somebody had to drop out for family reasons. So yeah, I'm going to introduce the panelists, and we have a lot of interesting things to talk about. So first on my left is Samantha Perahia. Samantha has an MBE, and she is head of production for the really amazing British Film Commission, and she will tell you all about what their purpose is. But it's really, I have to pay credit to Samantha because she's been the persistent voice in keeping the UK really at the forefront of global production. And I don't think that's an hyperbole. It's a really extraordinary achievement that she and her team have pioneered. So Samantha, why don't you tell me a little bit about kind of what the BFC does and kind of where you fit in and kind of what the agenda is for your organisation.
No, happy to, and thank you very much for having me, and lovely to meet you all. So British Film Commission is predominantly UK government funded organisation, and we are responsible for maximising and supporting what we call inward investment production. So that is predominantly US financed high-end television, so the big juicy TV dramas like the Game of Thrones and the big Netflix shows. And feature films, so the big US studio features, the Warner Brothers, Sony, Disney, etc. So we're responsible for working with those companies to bring them to the UK and support them while they're making their TV shows and feature films in the UK. We are also responsible for supporting and promoting the UK film and TV infrastructure, so that's everything from studio space to post and VFX, which is how I know some of these guys, and equipment rental, but also locations, and crew is obviously a very central part of that, and skills, which hopefully we'll talk about later.
I'll get into a deeper dive, but I'm just going to go round and just get everybody can give a tiny introduction, if that's okay.
Sure.
And so David Levy is the next panelist, and he works for an amazing business called Arri, and he is director for business development of Global Solutions. I think he's better placed to explain what that mysterious business title means, but I think also Arri is an incredible engine for creativity across the business world production space, and David, I'm sure, will talk about what he does and how Arri fits in.
Thank you, Robert. So Arri is like I said, it's core a technology company. It's a manufacturer as well. It's 100 years old, a privately owned company. The original founding brothers were very active filmmakers and decided they needed the right tools and the right paintbrushes and canvases in order to tell their story. So they started manufacturing cinematic film equipment and lighting around 100 years ago, and we're still here today, still privately owned by some of the original family. And not only do we manufacture the equipment, we also have very large rental services that we support with, and of recently, and this is the area I work in, we do systems integration for film, TV and broadcast.
Okay. And critically, David was born in Marlow?
I was. Well, not born in Marlow, but I lived here and I went to Great Marlow School, and I'm very fond of the location, and my mum still lives here, and I live just next door in High Wycombe.
And next we have the incomparable Dom Tighe. So Dom is a young, brilliant producer who's just about to have him release his first debut feature, which is obviously, I'm longing to see it, I haven't seen it yet, but it is going to land with some impact in general release. He was also longlisted by the British Independent Film Awards for this year's Breakthrough Producer. And there we go, I've teed you up.
Thank you. It's actually been out already. It's called Bull, and it's played in Odeon and Picture House. I think it's coming to the end of its theatrical release, but it will be available January on VOD. But yes, thank you. I've been in the industry for about 20 years in different guises. I'm trained as an actor. I still am an actor actually, and have been transitioning, shall we say, into producing and production via locations and via all sorts of other jobs on set. So I'm very happy to be here.
And because this organisation of Jam Academy is about performing arts, I think kind of that's close to your heart as well, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I still am an actor. I've got a couple of TV series coming out next year, so I still am acting, but an actor with, I suppose, initiative to try and juggle two things at once, which is hard work, but good fun.
And Nigel Bennet, last but definitely not least, so he's one of the UK's most influential people in post-production via Molinaire and previously Pinewood. So, I mean, I'm sure he'll tell you about this, but he's been involved in stewarding hundreds of films and TV shows to, kind of some of the complex work that gets involved in post-production. So,
thank you. Yes. So I spent 24 years in post-production. Started at Shepperton Studios, and I was lucky enough to start when Ridley and Tony Scott were directors of the studio, and very visionary studio back in those days. And then Pinewood brought Shepperton probably about 2004, and the whole industry just evolved. And from probably 2008, it really did grow. Pinewood expanded massively, and we really upped the service offering there over the years. And post-production is a huge part of filmmaking that no one really understands, and it's all the nuances that goes on in that space, and I can tell you a bit more later. And then I left Pinewood back in 2019 and went to Molinaire, a company that's 48 years old, post-production, probably the oldest independent post-production business in the UK. And then through the pandemic, I actually set another business up called Pip Studios that is out in Winnersh Triangle. So eventful times, but love the industry, love seeing talent come through. It's a big part of what I do with all the roles that I've done through my career, so yeah.
Well, first and foremost, thank you everybody for coming. This is a really interesting cross-section of kind of policy, production, post-production, and I guess I stand for facilities in the making. But Samantha, let's get a little bit more about the BFC, and it's interesting how much the government actually centrally leans into this sector, and so what's your, why do you think they're so interested in it?
Well, the creative sector is the fastest growing sector. It's outstripping finance and pharmaceuticals in terms of growth. So, but it's also globally respected and enjoyed. So there is the double whammy really of the economic impact, the impacts on employment, but also the cultural impact. The soft power is enormous. So both for tourism, but also just as for the UK, just as our image overseas. So that's why the British Film Commission exists. We have a predominantly commercial remit. It's very much about maximising production because it creates huge amounts of revenue for the UK, but also employment, as I've said. We're funded predominantly by Department for Culture, Media and Sport, but also to a degree by Department for International Trade, which tells you a lot about how invested government is in this industry. And part of our remits, I talked a little bit earlier about, the headline is to bring in as much production as possible, and that's about developing business relationships with those inward investment companies that I talked about, and also supporting all the UK infrastructure, UK-wide. We're a UK-wide agency. We look after all 4 countries of the UK, to ensure that we're best set up as we can be to support those major productions coming in. And we're also responsible for liaising between government and industry to remain as film-friendly as possible, and that's everything from the fact that we have an extremely generous and transparent and easy-to-use tax relief system, which as part of the ecosystem makes us incredibly successful, but it is because it's part of a much broader ecosystem. There's no point in having a tax relief with no industry to support it. You have to have the crew, the VFX and post, the studios, as well as that tax relief. So we work a lot on that with government, just to inform them about any policy areas which impact on our success, and we're very lucky to have their support.
Yeah, and that sort of central government support, I mean, it's obviously not just a tax credit, which I mean, you know, all the stats show that's a very, very powerful tool of investment, because the money gets returned very quickly.
Exactly right.
But you know, kind of, it's really clear that you know, the government's very excited about this sector and about the potential for all things. So, you know, if if you're across the other side of the Atlantic, there are lots of places that compete for tax credits and trying to attract all this. So let's drill into a little bit more about why the UK is quite that successful. Yeah. I mean, obviously this year we'll see the 100th anniversary of the BBC, but what, so you know, you've been doing this brilliantly for 17 years. So what are the changes you've seen, and why do you think it's evolving in such a brilliant way?
So it's that combination of factors. You can't have any one aspect of it. You need to have that perfect ecosystem in order to be able to attract these major productions that we're lucky to work on in the UK. Just for a bit of context about the economics of it before I go into the model, I was mentioning to you just before we started, first 3 quarters of this year, so between January and September of 2021, combined film and TV spend in the UK was £4.7 billion pounds. So that's over 2.5 times more than last year. Yes, we were in a pandemic last year, but we were the first industry to get back up and running after we're still in a pandemic, so it wasn't after the pandemic, but during the pandemic we created some guidance which we can talk about later if it's of interest. But just to context, so like every other industry in the UK, in March 2020 we shut down completely, doors closed, nobody was working. By 1st of June, when we released the guidance, we started slowly climbing up, back up and running. By the last quarter of 2020, we had the biggest spend ever in the UK's history for production, and it's basically increased and increased. So this last 9 months of 2021 has been the biggest UK spend we've ever seen. So that explains to a degree why government is very invested in us, but they're also partly responsible for that investment because of the ecosystem which they support. So clearly they fund the British Film Commission, they help fund the BFI, which is another lead film and TV organisation in the UK. We have, as an example, as well as the tax relief, one of the things that they released during the pandemic was a government-backed insurance scheme to allow independent films to get back up and running during COVID. We have a government, partly government-funded skills and training development organisation through Screen Skills. Industry contributes massively to that organisation, I should say, but for us to have a government underwritten organisation that leads on skills and training is pretty unique to the UK. And then, so that's the kind of the government support that we enjoy. And then you have, you know, some of these amazing organisations. We have the best VFX and post. This is not even spin. The statistics and the number of Oscars support it.
Well, half the performance Oscar category performances this year, whether it's lead or supporting actress, half of those nominations, it's 40% actually, were Brits this year, which is an unbelievable result. Yeah. Unbelievable.
And VFX Oscar has been won by British teams 5 years in a row. I mean, we're relatively speaking, a tiny country. Yeah. So those kinds of statistics are remarkable. Yeah. So, and it's the tax relief and that government support that keeps us on a relatively level playing field with our competitors. But it's the infrastructure, it's the on-screen and behind the camera talent, the studios, the VFX and post that brings people to the UK.
Yeah. And so, we'll get on to the sort of studio stuff later, but in terms of looking at it from the outside, it's a really exceptional achievement because I mean there's some crazy stats about how much more successful British product is than world competitors. Even, you know, I think it was in 2016 or something that a film made in Britain was 3.5 times more likely to succeed than
I've not heard that stat.
It's amazing.
I'm going to nick that.
No, it's a really phenomenal one. Well, but it becomes a reinforcing cycle because when you have, you know, we've had 60 years of Bond films, which have been pioneering the blockbuster. We've had Star Wars being made here since the 70s, and really, as well as really, you know, kind of the stuff that Dom's been doing, really incredibly, you know, brilliant storytelling at a smaller scale. But once the big films are here, and there's no doubt they're here, that, you know, it's a very, very attractive place to come and work because there's all that expertise. And but I also just want to pay tribute to this, to getting people back to work during COVID, because that was, you know, like a lot of industries, that was an existential crisis for the creative industries. And I think, you know, that the work that you and everybody did is applauded by that. But, you know, because I think the future of the industry, it's really interesting that the pandemic really kind of cemented the era of streaming and what big budget content looks like and is emotionally to engage with. So do you want to just talk a little bit about the new paradigm of streaming and what that means for production in the UK?
Sure. So, I mean, broader than streaming, what we call high-end TV, which is defined by budget level, really. So it's scripted dramas, and that includes comedy. Why we call it drama, I don't know, but we do. With budgets of more than £1 million per broadcast hour. So most of the ones that we work on are considerably larger than £1 million per broadcast hour, but it is those ones like Game of Thrones and The Crown and Succession and projects like that. So the real turning point for the UK, or a real turning point for the UK, was in 2004 when we launched, 2013 when we launched the high-end TV tax relief. Up until that point, we had been known for the BBC and ITV and the amazing crews that existed in various production hubs around the UK, but it was very much about the domestic TV scene. And then in London and the South East, basically in the home counties, you had these massive studio features like the Harry Potter films and the James Bond films and the Batman films and so forth. But there was a real split between those big US studio films and then the domestic TV shows and independent features that were shooting elsewhere in the UK. Along came the TV tax relief in 2013, and all of a sudden these international producers started bringing more production to the UK, big high-end TV dramas. And because
and that's really because we sort of, you know, because of Game of Thrones and The Crown, I think people started to understand the power of
Game of Thrones was the game changer because they didn't have tax relief to shoot here, but the Northern Ireland government, because it was did anybody know that? Game of Thrones is based in Belfast. I mean, it's the biggest TV show made anywhere in the world, and it's in Belfast, the smallest one of the smallest cities in the smallest countries of the UK. So it's a remarkable achievement. So it was Northern Ireland government saw this opportunity, and a fantastic producer called Mark Huffam, whom Nigel certainly will know, who said, right, come on guys, we need to back this. This is an opportunity. Yeah, so it was that model that we were able to use to demonstrate to central government that there is a market failure here, as we call it, which is to say that we could be attracting this much more inward investment if we were investing in a tax relief.
I remember you saying when we sat down 5 years ago, basically with turning away so many big productions because there's no facilities to capture the growth, never mind what's here at the moment.
So once that was in place, and government saw the opportunity. To be fair, we are very good in the UK with BFI's assistance and the BFC rallying the industry. We're really good at providing data. You talked about that return on investment figure. We make sure we have that. We do that every few years. BFI lead on it to demonstrate the value of the tax relief, so we're able to show government the value. So once that tax relief was in 2013, because we have the most amazing TV drama crew around 7 production hubs of the UK. So obviously London and the southeast, but also the southwest. There was a huge BBC presence down there. Northwest obviously was the heart of BBC, and then in Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, and Yorkshire. In fact, there's another own production hub. So there was already these big chunky crew bases there working on very sophisticated TV dramas, and with that additional investment and additional training and additional infrastructure, all of a sudden high-end TV in the UK, which includes the streamers, like Netflix originally was mostly Netflix, absolutely started booming. So from having feature film investment in the UK by far exceeding TV, we've slowly come to the point where film investment has increased by around about 30% year on year. High-end TV over the last 5 years has increased by something like 250%, and it will be a lot more by this time next year.
And I think the two media are sort of merging, because it's it's just a longer form of way to big budget. We can come back to that in a sec, but we can do a general discussion. But David, so you do something very interesting, and seeing the sort of tech that you're pioneering. Do you want to speak a little bit about that and see what how do you describe what you do to demystify?
Well, if anyone's familiar with the TV show Star Trek, they had a special room called the holodeck, and in the holodeck you can reproduce any point in time, any environment, and that's kind of what we wanted to do. We wanted to build this room and be able to generate environments and time and light in a very controlled and very effective and efficient manner. I mean, it's not the cheapest way of producing, but actually if effectively utilized, it really can make huge savings and assurances to the productions that they're going to capture those moments in a really sophisticated way. If anyone's watched The Mandalorian on Disney Plus, there's a great behind the scenes where they demonstrate some of the first uses of the LED video wall technology, but it's not particularly new ideas. I mean, the ideas of creating environments in a studio environment is very old. 100 years of people like Buster Keaton and James Cameron and Steven Spielberg all producing these amazing visual effects and in camera has been going on for a very long time. And what we've done at Arri is we've sort of said, okay, we're a technology company, we embrace this, we think it's a really good idea, and also it will satisfy our new friends in the streaming world. I mean, we talked about the large streamers, your Netflixes, your Apples, your Amazons. They all have a list of content they have to make in a year. And every year that list gets bigger and bigger, and there's this little bit of a intellectual property war going on between them all. And the only way they can really, year on year, generate that much original content is to use technology, and to use that technology to tell stories at the highest production value as possible. And we're working with the likes of all these streamers and supporting them on a technology front. We make paintbrushes, and we design and build canvases now for studios, and the idea is really to be able to have creative freedom, but with the security of doing it inside a studio environment.
And just so just as a sort of layman, if I was lucky enough to tour what David's doing, and it is genuinely astonishing. It's like virtual reality with the goggles. You are literally teleported to places. So that moment on your demo day the other day, you put up sort of Regent Street. I mean, it was really dizzying because suddenly you're there.
We're in.
And when I was an editor many years ago, the idea that someone had to act a tennis ball was kind of there were a lot of really serious actors emoting to tennis balls. So why is your system different, and why are people really responding to it?
Well, for the talent side, which again, the UK in terms of popular culture and talent, it's extraordinary. This tiny little island generates so much talent, from actors to DOPs to directors, musicians, video game artists. Like we've got this really special ecosystem right here in England, and when we use it in the right way, we can do astonishing things. And these types of studios are astonishing because you're generating a visual representation of the environment which the talent can interact with, which the actor can reference to. So when they're driving down the road, they can see actually which orientation and where the red lights are coming on, all these types of things. For the DOP, he knows where the light's coming from, so he can light accordingly. And we have this, it gives you a really brilliant base level of lighting in these environments where, because it's an emissive lighting source coming off the LED video walls, it instantly gets you a base level of illumination. But if you're doing anything with a high reflective object like a car, it instantly puts all the reflections in the right places, but then we can also manipulate those reflections to, you know, the DOP goes, I want to stretch that reflection a little bit. So we've got an automated ceiling piece on 16 soft start motors. We can position it millimeter accurate and really place it in the position the creatives want to, rather than going to Regent Street, doing all the logistics of blocking that road off, getting the police escort, shutting it all down, hopefully to get that one scene in the film which is integral to.
But that's a really interesting point, because you know, we all know that a lot of the time on set is not a romantic moment.
No.
There's a lot of cables and there's a lot of people to move around. There's a lot of sonics to be fed. So you know, kind of to demystify it, when you change the camera position for an actor, that's a huge process. It can take a long time to turn the whole crew around. So what you know, why is it so exciting what you do about that?
So a nice example is the TV show 1899, which is a Netflix commissioned show, German language, one of the most popular German language TV shows, and we had the pleasure of being invited to do the technical supervision and installation of that studio in Babelsberg, another very old film studio complex in Berlin, Potsdam. And we looked at the process of, basically the whole film is about being on a boat in the middle of the ocean and things go bad. But because of the pandemic, but because of the pandemic, they couldn't do any of that. They couldn't go on location. They couldn't get the boat. It was just an impossible feat. So they went, okay, so we need to use the technology which we know is available, and the Mandalorian showed that it is a possibility to pull off these really difficult location shots. So they built a very large wall of LED. They Frame Store built the assets of the virtual worlds of which this story is told. But what we did was, in the middle of the stage, we put a gigantic rotating table, which meant we could put the set on. And then we built the set in sort of cheese slices. So you could pull sections of the set out, but it also meant you could rotate everything. So instead of moving the camera, getting everybody out, repositioning, we just rotate the world on one way, rotate the world on the other way, and we do all our French reverses.
And what's so brilliant about that is normally you have to move 30 trucks to do that. And there's sometimes up to 1,000 people behind the camera doing stuff.
Absolutely.
So every time that logistically you have to do that. I mean, it's clearly a very effective thing. So I was lucky enough to go to not your volume, but one on Infinity Stage in Burbank last week, and the scale of what they're doing at Disney is really interesting. And to reinforce your point about content, they said that of the 1,000 hours of television, and it's really, you know, most of it's way above $1 million an hour, about 40% of those productions are going to use virtual in some format. And obviously, as a producer, it's a really fascinating tool, because, you know, you don't have to get on a jumbo jet. Well, not that everybody gets on a jumbo jet anymore, but you know, for COVID, for all these things. So it's a really fascinating thing. But I'm a bit of a geek. So what about the rendering and all that sort of stuff? The compute that's involved, and how does that work?
So VFX has been using environment generation for a very long time. I'd say at least 50 years. Well, yeah, it's about 50 years of computers and 50 years of when we started off very basic geometric shapes and pre-visualizing a lot of stuff. The pre-visualization got so good and the compute power got so good. I mean, we're seeing Moore's law in action, and that is an exponential acceleration in computer processing power. And we're really seeing it. I mean, month on month, in our stage alone, we've updated the server room about 2 or 3 times, because all of a sudden a new network card or a new graphics processor comes out, which allows us to do things faster and more efficiently. But it's incredible. By going to our friends in the video game world, Epic Games, people like Unity, they have these real-time render engines, and that means they're computer-generated environments which you can move through in real time, and they render in real time. In the old days, you would render a very photorealistic scene and you'd hit render and you might be waiting 2 or 3 days for that photorealistic perfect image to process.
I think I told you the stat when I was the assistant editor on Shakespeare in Love. We had total storage for the entire movie of 27 gigabytes. And I think nowadays, if you had that on your pen drive, you'd be laughed out of court. We're mindful we've got limited time, but we'll come back for a general discussion. But so Dom, you and I haven't really had a chance to talk about the brilliant things you've been doing. So
but that sounds amazing. But from someone who still earns a living in locations, that worries me slightly. Am I going to be out of a job?
I don't think
shutting
so.
down Regent Street.
Well, it's the places you can't get to. It's the places like, I mean, if you're going to go shoot on a volcano, nobody really wants to do that. That's an incredibly difficult, expensive and dangerous process. But if it's a field in the countryside, yeah, you'd go shoot it on the field. Like,
but it also doesn't rain in the volume, does it?
It doesn't rain in the volume. There's no mud. It's very
But it's
controlled.
not a cheap option.
No, it's not a
I
cheap
think
option.
I think that's the other thing to be considered, but also just the. We're still talking about directors here. We've got directors who have a very, very particular view on technology or not. Some absolutely embrace it, and some will absolutely still want to work on film, and they will shoot the actual location.
And we'll come back. But so Dom, tell me, you're obviously very high tech on your film. So tell me about the process of getting that to the screen.
So I mean, one thing I think the Brits we're well supported to help grassroots filmmakers, and there's a real appetite to be able to make very low budget. The film that I just made was made for about £500,000, which is in film talk a tiny amount of money. Obviously, in real money, it's still a lot of money. But fortunately, there's a real appetite from people like service providers, post-production companies, government support from BFI, to really help and generate a new generation of talent coming through in a way that I don't think any other country really does it. So from someone who's starting out as a producer, it's very, very helpful, and there's a real appetite, and you've got excellent crew members who are prepared to work for reduced rates sometimes. So we were quite lucky actually with Bull, because we weren't the first, but one of the first, I think, things to shoot post-lockdown 1 in 2020, which actually meant people were desperate to work. So we actually ended up getting a really, really good crew, because people had been sitting around for 3-4 months not doing anything. It's getting harder because we're becoming a victim of our own success, and it is so busy out there that there is so much shooting that there isn't enough crew to go around. So actually everybody from, let alone the smaller projects, the bigger projects, are finding it very difficult to find good crew, which in turn is providing brilliant step-up opportunities for people who are being given more responsibility quicker. Now that's sometimes very, very good, sometimes that brings with it its own difficulties, inexperience, but on the whole, I think in the long term, it's going to be very, very good. I mean, I'm a complete example of stepping up into an HOD position probably quicker than I should have.
No, that's not true.
Well,
yeah, I mean, but I think there's a tribute to people who, you work incredibly hard at what you do and have, kind of really serious approach to it. And I think the one observation I would have is when I started out as a runner on film sets when I was 18, and it was sort of closed shop in those days, that you sort of had to know the right people and to get in. And my observation, I don't know if this is backed up, is that really has reversed. There's a really desperate need for people of talent to come into this industry, and it's for me, one of the reasons I'm doing this precise thing is it was a life-changing experience as a teenager, really understanding what a creative job could be. It's sort of, I didn't thrive at university, but I really, really found it empowering to be, kind of with a group of people doing something quite abstract, but very, very, very creative and quite challenging. But I think the industry is now in a position where, it's a much more sophisticated operation and with a lot more money. So it's that sort of thing. But tell me, for demystifying the process, how difficult is it to lead a concept and get it onto screen?
All honestly, it's incredibly difficult. It still is very difficult. It's a very competitive market, and we've got some of the best writers here, some of the best talent. I was very lucky with my film because I happened to have a BAFTA winning director called Paul Andrew Williams, who has made great tracks over the last, I think his last film was about 9 years ago. Before that, his first film was a film called London to Brighton that he made for, I think it was like £60,000. And it was a really fantastic film. So that was the beginning of his career. Then he's gone on and directed a whole bunch of TV for like Broadchurch and A Confession on ITV. And but he's open-minded enough to realise that he just wants to tell good stories. And for him, it's not always about big budgets. So he is prepared, because he can, to work on a much smaller scale. So when he gave me his script and I said, I'll produce this for you, it wasn't so difficult to sort of break down the doors because Paul brings with him a huge clout, a huge weight. But we didn't have any lead. We had well-known, very good actors in it, but no actors who would be sort of bankable box office successes. But then the risk was smaller because the budget was smaller. And again, what I think is amazing is that this tiny British independent feature film made for $500,000 was supported by Picture House in the cinemas, and it was supported by Odeon in the cinemas, and it played its dues. And we opened up against Eternals, so we were never going to get to number one. But the fact that it happens and the fact that it has enjoyed a theatrical release, I think, is a huge thing for the industry and for the country.
And Dom, here's a really thorny hardball. What is a producer? What do they do?
The producer, it's a good question, I'm finding out. A producer is someone who I've realised is prepared to not be very popular sometimes, the guy who says no or the girl who says no, but I think it's the glue between all the different departments. And I would like to be the type of producer that is involved from conception, development, finance, production, all the way through to distribution. Sometimes producers will board projects a bit later when the development is done and they'll see the production through. But I think you have to have a sensitivity and an understanding of different needs and different demands from all the different departments, and know how to balance creativity with logistical sense or financial sense when you might be working with a writer, director, or who say, I want it to be this way, this is my vision, and the finance is saying, well, if you do it like that, you're probably not going to get your money back. And then you've got to have X actor who is worth a lot of money, in terms of box office, and just constantly playing, trying to find a path through for everyone to get on the same page, which is sometimes not a very easy.
And there's no adrenaline involved in it at all.
No adrenaline at all. I mean, I think producing Bull was one of the most, in fact, no, it was the most stressful thing I've ever done in my life, partly because of what you don't know frightens you, and now that you've done it once, I'm hoping the next one.
I mean, it is a form of
a little bit easier.
Producing and carrying a show is a form of sorcery. It's really interesting. There are obviously brilliant training courses. So if anybody's interested, you should look at National Film and Television School, which is up the road. But there are a lot of places to learn. But there's no substitute for on the job training and getting credits. So Nigel, I mean, where we've got sort of limited time, but Nigel, I know a bit about old school post production, but. Again, the same question. What does post-production involve? What does that actually mean?
Shall I try and let's explain it from camera? So Arri, whether it's a digital camera or film camera, TV show, film, you'll go from camera from the raw data, so 4K, scanning in high resolution files. You create then proxy files that go to an offline process where you have an editor, where you're a second assistant on Shakespeare and Love.
First assistant.
Sorry, first assistant, but Shakespeare and Love. But if you go through that process, so the data comes off, and then you'll class it as an assembly edit. So the editor will go through it and have assistants, and they'll go through an assembly edit to end of shoot. And when they finish the shoot process, you'll have the director comes in, maybe the producer will come in, depending on where the cut gets to. But you go through a process where that cut gets locked off at some point. It gets handed over to audio, where you'll have a dialogue editor, sound effects editor, a music editor, and that whole process will take anywhere from 10 weeks to maybe over 50 weeks, that whole process. And there's so many nuances that go on, because if you've got green screen, you'll have VFX that comes through. But if I can imagine this process where you get to the end of the film in an offline process, and then you go back to the raw material, whether it's the film material, the digital material, and you will do the conform of the raw footage. And once the raw footage is completed, it will then go to the grade, and titles will be done over here, end titles, front title design, and they'll bolt that all together, and they'll go through a grade process where they will grade a TV series predominantly for an hour is 2 days. You get a feature film, an independent will probably be about 2 weeks. A big feature film, a Marvel, you might have 10 weeks. But you go through that process where your picture gets finished, so all the titles are done and everything else. Audio is quite a complicated process because I think everyone thinks audio comes off as a track on set. Well, let me just say there's so many processes that go on that is quite entertaining in some ways when you do Foley. So if I take my dialogue out now and you go, we're going to sell an international French version, none of this. So basically you'll go into a Foley theatre and they'll create all these sounds without talking, and then maybe if there's a car crash, somebody gets hit, you'll get melons and you'll crush them to get the right sounds. And the sound process is just, it's quite amazing. And then you come to the end of it where you've got all your dialogues track laid, your effects, sound design, music, and it all goes then into a theatre where now Dolby Atmos is the big thing, IMAX, and you will mix for probably a feature film, let's talk about feature film, independent, probably 4 weeks in total. A week dialogues, a week effects, and then you'll do a 2-week final mix where everyone comes into the room. It's the final sign-off process, so that is very, very complicated because you have all of these voices in the room saying what they want. They want more music, they want more sound design, they want to hear the dialogues more. So you go through that process and can be quite intense. But you come to the end of the film and you create then what you class as a print master, and then basically you get the film, the digital film over here of the picture and the audio, and it all gets married together, and then you create what's classed as a DCP that goes to a cinema, or you create digital files for Netflix delivery, Amazon, BBC. But this whole process will be, it takes a long time to get to that part. And I would say for a director, producer, and I've worked with lots over the years, is that it's such a process that there's so many people that get involved in that process for final sign-off. And I've worked with some of the best directors in the world, and you realise it's the collaboration of everyone coming together that makes the content so good at the end. And I'd say in general terms, without going into all the detail, that is the post-production process.
Yeah, but it's also my experience, and I think you've laid out really clearly what a technical, huge challenge it is. But I think the thing that kind of the people that use your services and your facilities are thinking about things very emotionally. So what astonished me when I was cutting is that one frame on a cut, which is is a 50th of a second, effectively makes a difference whether a joke lands or not. And it's so marrying that incredible technology that you deal with and all the kind of human interface, but just all the emotional heft that you have to kind of keep very objective. It's a very subjective process, but then it has to work for everybody objectively. That's what's astonishing about what you do and enable, because as a producer, Don, is that you're only as good as the people behind you, and that's and I used to find it. I mean, when you watching stuff over and over again, it loses the impact. So in terms of when people come into you, and do you have a responsibility just for being for logistics, or is there a way that you give a sort of think about the environment that you put in so that people do their best work?
Yeah, I suppose because I come from a creative background, I suppose I always look at productions and look at the value of them, and I've done a feature film whole post for £3,000, and they end up
careful, Tom will be your next
but the film got sold, it got brought by Universal, they came back, we re-edited the film, and and I love helping filmmakers, and it is the process that we get involved with that I can make that happen. And I go back to one of the scenarios in my life. We were doing Love Actually, and Duncan Kenworthy, the producer, and that was something, going back to what you said, the amount of fine cutting they did on that production to get the laughs, the music, just the detail that went into that production, in the mix of going back and re-editing, and then we had to reconform all the tracks and then bring it back in again. That whole process goes on right until the very end. As I said, when you create that DCP, you can't go back. I have seen productions before where they've actually cut the DCP before premiere. And it is just frightening to see how they push it to the absolute max. But where the challenge is now in our market when you get to that point, so Netflix, even the streamers, the broadcasters now, you get everything day and date release. Whether it's a feature film, everyone wants to binge watch. So if you can imagine, so a feature film, if you talk about a big Disney animation, that will be 47 languages that gets dubbed into. So you think when you lock that picture, if it's a day and date release, you've got to suddenly make 47 languages of this version of the film, and that's subtitles, that's dialogue replacement in all different languages. If you then talk about a Netflix show, that might go up to 12 to 16 languages. So you look at the process that goes on, and that's where locking off that picture is so important. And when you see it push, and some friends at Paramount used to, I won't mention the director's name, but they would just, fear would be on their face when we get to doing an international version, because we are still getting changes all the way through that process. And it's pushing it to the wire. It's to give the creative as much time as they possibly can to get that as best they can, like your production.
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking to a producer last week, and he said, my job is just to keep going until someone tells me to stop. And that's really difficult if you're working in environments that are highly technical and need a lot of discipline. But I'm going to open up to questions in a sec, so if we have any online. But so, Samantha, I'm just going to ask you a very pressing question, which is about postcodes. So for me, it seems evident why Marlow is such has an amazing possibility for building, I'm sort of describing it as a cultural gigafactory. Any other town in the world can build a kind of factory of any type. But do you want to just give an idea about why 30 miles is so important, and why, why for certain types of productions that's a really critical?
Yeah. So the 30 miles that rule has kind of changed somewhat, as we've seen talking about some of the projects being built further out west and further out east. But we talked about the importance of this ecosystem. So you have to have every aspect of that ecosystem in order to support major production. And the most important parts of that ecosystem actually is the crew base. Yeah. Because of travel times, in order to make a project financially viable and logistically viable, you can't have crew travelling for an hour and a half or 2 hours to get to their place of work. You need to have a shoot day, you need to be sticking to union rules for turnaround time for your cast and crew, and you just need the practicality of having a shooting day of a certain length. So the crew base is absolutely paramount. So anywhere where anybody starts developing a studio, that's the first question. So my colleague Jeremy, who's in the audience, works with me on our Stage Space Support and Development Initiative.
But I think because it's such a mystifying process, just explaining. I mean, we're behind us. We have this board about showing what's been made in the last few years in Buckinghamshire alone, or at least in part. Just how sticky getting kind of shows that are, on here there's probably a few £1 billion worth of investment. Yeah. So why is that so sticky to London particularly, do you think? I mean, I know that it's, from a policy point of view, there's production everywhere, but why are some of the very, very biggest people in the world coming to really local?
Well, the crew base is the biggest. The South East's crew base, London and the South East, the crew base is bigger because the industry is much more established. It's been around for much longer. But as I've said, there is a split between major US studio feature films like the James Bonds and the Jurassic Worlds, both of which shot at or based at Pinewood Studios in Bucks.
Which is 10 miles from here.
Exactly. So as I've said, those home counties, Buckinghamshire, Hertfordshire, in particular, are Surrey as well, of course. Basically, the west of London is the biggest crew base in the UK. But we are seeing, as I say, the high-end TV and streaming in particular being based in the other production hubs. We are lucky enough to have 7 production hubs, but yes, London, the South East, and the home counties, and the western home counties in particular, is obviously the biggest crew base.
So I'm going to open up to questions. So I've got 2 from YouTube at the moment, which I'll just throw it out to anyone. but probably to Dom actually. So the question is, how can a young creative with a film idea get heard? I mean, I think you can speak to this quite.
I suppose a young creative, I presume that is a writer, director, or maybe not, maybe it's a producer, but how can they get heard? I think the key is to try and dive in as deep as you can into the industry as quickly as possible, in any way, initially, I would suggest. I mean, there are so many opportunities, particularly in locations, for recent graduates, even 18-year-olds upwards, to be a location marshal, which is how I actually started, where you will go to work for the locations department, and you could work on, I worked on Fast and Furious and Hobbs and Shaw, we were landing helicopters outside St Paul's Cathedral, we were Jack Ryan, we shut down the West End and blew up the Burger House on Leicester Square, and there's lots of opportunity there. And then as soon as you get into that, and you get into a regular work load, you can join the Facebook groups and you get invited to WhatsApp groups, and before you know it, there's work coming out of your ears. And it's no joke, I promise you, there's no joke. There, you could get signed up to a series for 16 weeks, and you would have work for 16 weeks as a location marshal. It's not a glamorous job, I warn you. It is very often waiting around on the street. You might be dealing with members of the public. You might be asking people to hold. You might be cleaning the bins, literally. You might be standing in a field. You might be lugging equipment from left to right. You might be setting up a crowd base over there, or a technical base over there. But it's a brilliant introduction and a way in. And from there, people often then move on to the AD department. You can go be an assistant director, and you're a runner on a series. But by doing that, you're then just surrounding yourself with like-minded people, and people who share your enthusiasm and your desire to want to make ends meet in the industry. And then you start talking to people, and before you know it, you've got a whole gaggle of people around you, and you can help each other and support each other, and then you meet somebody else. And if you have those ideas, if you're a writer, you should carry on writing whilst you're working in locations. Before you know it, you're standing in front of somebody who might be able to help you with that script. And particularly if they've seen that you're hardworking and you've applied yourself and you've proved yourself on set, then someone might give you an opportunity in a different area. Like you might become an assistant to somebody, and suddenly you're assisting a major Hollywood director or something like that. This, I'm not making this up, and this is literally how it works. So I mean, I would suggest you try and sign up to some of the Facebook groups, or put yourself out there.
Also, skill set is a really key. So yeah, sorry. So screen skills.
Screen skills website first and foremost.
Yeah, because they are really good at advocating for I mean, there's a parallel question which is about qualification, degree, postgrad, or apprenticeships. Nigel and David, do your organisations actively take in trainees? What's kind of how do you see that sort of pastoral care?
So I mean, over the past year, we've used lots of different ways of bringing people into the industry, but so there was a government scheme they set up that we were actually one of the first people to utilise this, and this was people on universal credit, and if they were out of work, and we've had Kickstarters, we've probably had about 38 through our business over the past 12 months, and it's been a fantastic scheme. We've kept probably 10 of them on, other ones have moved on to production, but it's something that I've always been ingrained in me, certainly when I've been at Shepton, Pinewood, and even now. And it's about bringing talent through. It's about nurturing talent, bringing talent through. When you see the industry growing the way it is, it's all about bringing people through. And whether it's people that are on my reception, who then move on to production, or whether they come in and they go, I want to go a route of editorial. But it's the way that we bring people through. And I think this industry, and I sit on the Screen Skills Council, and I go to quarterly meetings, we talk about the way that we can bring people into the industry. And it's the key, because this is a fantastic industry to work in. It just needs people to give that opportunity, and whether they're graduates or whether they've come out of college, whether they're school leavers, we give everyone an opportunity.
There's never been more opportunity for people to come into this industry ever. I would have killed for the opportunities available now.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I did
It's
some
amazing.
revolting jobs.
Did you? You went to but what the thing that struck me is it's a very egalitarian, very welcoming. Yes, you have to work.
It is now.
I mean, but you also have to work really hard to demonstrate your capability and you know, kind of on. So, what are the challenges, David, for the kind of really technical trades like Arri are involved in? Is there, you know, are you looking for bright new talent?
Always. So we in Arri Rental, we run apprenticeship schemes. You know, you start off as a trainee on the tech floor. You really get familiar with all the equipment, and the people come in to do testing. You know, you speak with all the top DOPs, top gaffers, top grips. And actually, over the last couple of about 10 months, because of the uptake of production, we've lost about 10 people. You know, the DOP comes in, he likes the way the young tech's operating. He's like, do you want 4 weeks on a job? And you're like, please don't do that. But that was always encouraged, because we want those techs to go on to production. And we also do a lot of work with academia. We work with the universities a lot. We do workshops. We take a lot of our time to work with young people. I mean, when I started out, I didn't really go down the university route. I went to mandy.com, which is still around, and I looked for low, no pay, and I did 2-3 years of running, camera assisting, gripping, and it's like what you say, once you're embedded and you ingrain yourself and you show you're not, you know, just here for a sort of romantic idea of what being creative's about, you'll be embraced and you'll have a career for all your life, and it is a wonderful career, and it's the only art form, I think, which incorporates all art forms. So from art department to DOPs to lighting designers to writers, directors, poetry, everything. It really incorporates all those arts, and I think that's why we all love it so much. It's such a culturally enriching industry.
But it's wider than that as well. I remember the first experience on a film set called The Hole, which filmed at which I
scary film.
Yeah, great film actually. They filmed some of it where I went to school, and then I said to the location manager, "Can I come with you?" And she said, "Yeah, right." So I spent the 6 weeks with her up and down the country, which I love it filmed near Reading as well. But I remember then thinking, you can do any job in a film set. You could be a lawyer in a film. You could be an accountant in a film. You can work in insurance in a film set. You could be a mechanic. You can be a carpenter. You can be a medic. You can be a caterer. You can be, I mean, pretty much any walk of life you will find on a film set.
And I mean, quite an interesting idea. The way to think about it is, so you know, kind of probably the average film or high-end feature has high-end TV has maybe 500 crew. 50 people are going to be the people who maybe come internationally. You know, kind of maybe there are 5 people who are really globally significant. But then at the other end, normally a show of that scale will have 50 trainees on. And that's what's really exciting, is that, you know, once you've got one credit and you can secure a traineeship, then it's really the world is your oyster because of exactly the sort of amazing work that's going. Now I'm going to open it to the floor for a few questions, but can we just have a show of hands? Who is really interested in this trade, and who's here because of the studio? And show of hands who has thought about working in this industry, who'd like to. Okay.
Now's a good time.
Yeah, really good time. And I mean, but that's what's exciting about what we're trying to do is it's 2,000 basically brand new crew positions on lot that we're doing, and there's going to be lots of indirect jobs in, you know, kind of all the things that production normally supports. But does anybody have any burning questions they want to ask from the floor? Yeah, go for it.
Right, you said something about DCP is like the final version of the film. Didn't like Cats have to like retake in?
I don't think that's Nigel's fault.
Nigel
Does that mean every single department has to come back, or is it just the people that?
So when you get a final master and you have the audio attached to it, and it's in a tool called a Clipster normally. So you go back in. Editorial will give you updates, and then you have to put all the shots back in and reconform the timeline, and then audio will have to go and redo their bits, and it's a real process, and then you re-render it out, and then you can recreate your DCP that goes to the cinema. But once it gets to that final stage when it's locked, yeah, you're like, oh, don't do it, but they do always.
But I mean, David, your process is a really interesting one to do with LED shooting because the discipline comes much earlier in the process.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar. I mean, once you've burnt that image into the sensor, there's no real going back. I mean, unless you then go back into the very lengthy and expensive process of rotoscoping all the characters out of the backgrounds and then fixing the backgrounds. I mean, it requires a lot of discipline. I quite like that because it reminds me of the old film days, you know, shooting on 35, which I had the privilege of, you know, just before I transitioned to digital to actually do. I don't miss loading a 1,000-foot mag onto an Arri flex. You know, those were heavy. Everyone complains how heavy the equipment is. It was like, no idea. It was much heavier.
And no doubt Nigel and I did it, rewinding a huge 1,000-foot reel. That was quite a pain.
Yeah.
Post-production scripts I used to do.
God. So does anybody else have? We'll wrap it up if there are no more questions on the floor. But please just chip in because you know this is an amazing panel. So if you know it's worth raising anything you want to ask. So any more? Or did you have a follow up about cats?
No, I was just wondering because if every department would have to come back to just for that.
It'll be the editor. You'll have the audio team. You'll have the colorist. VFX will be delivering back in CGI. So it's all pulling that back in together where it all then ends up being brought back. So you don't have to have every department, but key departments. I mean, an editor, as we know, will be on right until the very end of when the production finishes, because just in case there's any changes. And then it's also then tying up the film at the end of it. It's all the backups, all of the logging of all the material, making sure it gets stored correctly. Because if you shot on film and you store it at the wrong temperature, it warps. So when you come back and rescan it, and a lot of the Harry Potters that I've got involved with over my time when we had a restoration department, is that you're scanning in film at high resolution and then you're remastering it back out to then digits, and it's incredible to see the amount of film that gets stored not in the correct temperature and what happens to it. And that's why it's incredible, this industry that I've worked in, to go from film to digits. And then suddenly digital cameras came around and everyone kind of went, we forgot about film. And then film had a resurgence probably about 5 years ago, where I'd say there's probably if there was 20 studio pictures shot in the UK, I'd say 5 or 6 of those would be shot on film. So it's quite interesting to see how the DOPs. Well, they love the look, don't they? And you can't always get that.
Yeah. But I mean, so there's an interesting point, which is people always change things. I mean, I on Shakespeare in Love, for instance, which was long wrapped. Everybody was in different continents doing stuff. They called back a slight change in the ending, so people had to have hair extensions. They rebuilt all the sets, and that was pretty much after picture log. So that was not a great producer involved in that. I won't mention his name, but it was, it is running away to the circus. And actually, because it's such an abstract emotional product, there's always the human dimension, and one doesn't want to dismiss the commercial dimension, but where those two collide is really interesting. And it's part of the journey on working on anything like this is it's a real experience, and I think that in terms of transferable skills, it teaches you all sorts of things. The University of Filmmaking is kind of one of the most valuable ways of learning our skills. Well, listen, we're going to wrap up here, but I just want to say thank you to the amazing panel. So Samantha, David, Dom, and Nigel, thank you very much. To show your appreciation.